Welcome to Shares from the American College of Financial Services, where money meets minds. Here's a look at what we'll be sharing with you today.
Allocating to lifetime income it's like a win-win in that you're going to get more income from the monies that you quote-unquote annuitize. And then you can spend more from the rest of your portfolio. So it actually creates two ways to have more income for life.
Welcome everyone to the Shares podcast. This is a special edition because we are at the 2024 AI CPA Engage Conference, and I'm here today with a special guest who I haven't talked to in such a long time, David Blanchett. David, how are you doing?
Great to be here.
Isn't it though? It is a reprisal of the Wealth Managed podcast, talking about a very surprising topic, which is retirement income planning.
We haven't talked about that topic much, I feel like.
I mean,
haven't really
every once in a while we do
Yeah.
research on retirement income planning. So I gave a presentation today where I talk about visualizing the different ways to do retirement income planning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, traditionally in financial planning, we very often use what's known as a fixed withdrawal strategy or fixed lifestyle strategy, like a 4% rule strategy.
Yeah.
And I know you and I have done a lot of research on this. What is wrong with spending the same amount of money every year from an investment portfolio in retirement? What are some of the trade-offs? Why is that not necessarily the best way to think about creating retirement income?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to go even further back is that no one actually does that. Right, no retiree.
Not even Bill Bengen does that.
No one like it's a fun modeling assumption, but no one like calls up their advisor and says, "Hey, CPI was up 3.8% last year. I'm going to spend exactly 3.8% more this year." Right. So I think the key is thinking about the assumptions that we've used. Some of us have used in research for a long time, and actual retiree behaviors. And retirees have varying levels of flexibility. And if you don't capture that in your financial planning models, you can give, I think, very bad advice and guidance around what people should be doing in terms of how they allocate the products, how they build portfolios, all of it.
Well, I think the reality is that none of us know what investment returns are going to be at the beginning of retirement. None of us know how long we're going to live.
You don't know the market returns?
I wish I did, but I don't, which means that I'm really at the mercy of the market when it comes to the amount of money that I can safely withdraw from an investment portfolio. So let's say I want to build $20,000 of income from an asset that has no investment risk, like treasuries. It's going to cost me $330,000 today to buy a treasury income of $20,000 a year to the age where I have an 80% probability of not outliving my savings. So that's kind of a baseline. Costs $325,000 today for, let's say, a healthy man to buy $20,000 of income using a bond ladder of treasuries. Mm-hmm. Now, the alternative, you could say, well, you can take more investment risk, you could potentially spend more, but if you take more investment risk, maybe $200,000 could buy you the same $20,000 per year, or maybe $350, or maybe $150. None of us knows how much income we can generate from a specific amount of money.
Right, I mean, to me, I think the key is thinking about the composition of your assets and your liabilities, right? So retiree households have two primary assets. They've got their savings, right? So that's qualified, non-qualified. Then they've got income. They've got mostly lifetime income, possibly wages. You're going to match that up against what you're going to spend money on, and so that could be like flexible and inflexible expenses. And I think it's okay to take on investment risk, with your portfolio, but you have to have a high level of flexibility.
Yeah.
Right? It's the minute that you say, no, I really need a high level of certainty for what I'm spending money on, so like more essential expenses, that's where, a portfolio, even a bond ladder I worry about, because, you say 80% chance of it lasting until you live long enough. What if you're that 20%?
It's a pretty big risk.
It really is a big risk. And so I think that it's really important to just understand what you're trying to accomplish with the income and then build strategies based upon that.
Okay, so that's a traditional way that economists think about retirement income planning, is that the income itself is a liability.
Yes.
And you use some sort of a liability-driven approach, which means safe assets fund those more inflexible expenses, riskier assets require a bit more flexibility, but on average, you can spend more if you invest in risky assets.
Yeah.
So that fixed spending strategy, probably not realistic. We have to be able to make some adjustments over time. Let's move to the next step of adjustability, and that's using a guardrail type strategy.
Sure.
So what is a guardrail strategy, and what are some of the trade-offs of using a guardrail strategy?
So again, guardrails simply are, I'm going to adjust the assumed level of spending, usually in a financial model, based upon the performance of the account, right? And again, I think what guardrails are trying to do is replicate what an advisor should be doing on an ongoing basis in the future, right? So guardrails are a form of dynamic adjustments to a spending strategy. And I think a problem, to your earlier point, like the 4% rule, it assumes that I make a decision at retirement and follow it blindly for 30 years. Guardrails are one of, I don't want to say infinite, but we'll call it 20 different ways you can assume that someone makes changes in the future. I think the key there is that it reflects the fact that an advisor might tell a client, or a client can tell themselves, hey, I'm going to make a change in the future, and then think about what does that mean for my overall level of spending. So it kind of removes this assumption that's wrong, that I'm not going to adapt to situations required.
So with a guardrail, I like to call it a constrained flexible model. Sure. Because you can increase your spending up to some sort of a threshold, you can decrease your spending up to a threshold, but there still is a constraint. And in other words, if you get very extreme investment returns, then those guardrails actually, on the downside, might push you toward failure. And on the upside, you may not actually be able to enjoy the upside of taking investment risk. Now, that is a whole nother topic. It's one I addressed recently in one of my articles for Advisor Perspectives, and that is, when you take investment risk in retirement and you're following a fixed spending strategy, who benefits if your portfolio does well?
Your heirs.
Your heirs, and your financial advisor.
Yes.
So if that's not your goal with the money, if you've already taken care of your heirs with a legacy goal, and the goal of that money is lifestyle, then why should I not be allowed to spend more when the market does well? And so actually the guardrails on the upside allow you to adjust your spending upward if you get lucky, if the market does well, but it's constrained. And it's also constrained on the downside, which means that it preserves the possibility of failure if you get bad market returns and if you live a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to me, where the guardrails really come in handy the most is they allow a higher starting point from the portfolio, right? I think that if you think about how most of the rules work, you usually don't have upward adjustments as much as you've got downward adjustments. But I think that people don't always, put in the right context that, like, use the word failure. I kind of died inside a little bit, right? Because people don't fail in retirement. You're going to have some kind of pension income like Social Security. So what you want to understand is the range of possible outcomes, right? So, showing someone a strategy or a plan that shows, hey, if the markets misbehave, this is where you're at. If they do well, I think the key is giving someone a sense of the trade-offs. And traditional rules don't do that because it's like either you do or you don't. In reality, life is much more colorful.
Now, the opposite, I would say, of a guardrail strategy or a fixed withdrawal strategy is a completely unconstrained strategy. And an example of that would be RMDs.
Yep.
So RMDs, your income next year is determined by your asset value this year and your expected longevity. Two pieces of information. And if your assets fall by 50%, then your spending might fall by 50%. It also creates the RMD strategy, if you follow it to the letter, creates a really weird path of spending. It means, I think right now at the age of 73, it's 3.6%, so it's really low at the very beginning. Then it goes way up in your 80s and 90s. Like, who wants a spending path that looks like that? And then later on in life, when your expected longevity is very low, it crashes. So you end up with this very hump-shaped spending pattern, but also the possibility that from year to year, your spending is going to vary a lot. But a lot of Americans actually follow this completely unconstrained strategy.
Yeah, I think that I don't think it's the opposite, right, of guardrails. I think of it as a continuum. You've got static strategies right here, and then static is like, I'm not going to change no matter what. And then you've got, RMD type models where I don't care what you were spending yesterday, I have a new amount today based upon the portfolio. And you don't have to use the actual RMD tables. I think you should actually calibrate the assumptions to your situation, your portfolio, your flexibility. But to me, there is this middle ground. So I think that maybe guardrails do a better job of reflecting how individuals want to make changes, because you don't want to all of a sudden spend 20% less if you have to from your portfolio. The key is I think understanding, again, like like how would you feel moving across these paths over time? But I do think that, if I had to pick one of the two, RMD is a more realistic way to view spending than just static, because you do have this base of guaranteed lifetime income with Social Security.
Almost a century ago, Solomon Huebner founded the American College of Financial Services based on a fundamental truth: knowledgeable professionals best serve the public's financial security. We've been here when markets crashed, world tensions rose, and when bubbles inevitably burst. But through it all, we've never lost sight of our mission to uplift the financial services profession and benefit society through applied financial knowledge. Over 200,000 financial professionals have chosen the college as their lifelong learning partner. Our expansive community continues to grow in success, powered by leading designation and certification programs, just-in-time learning opportunities, unique and inspiring events and impact initiatives that support efforts to attract newcomers to the profession and democratize financial education for all. We hope you'll expand your opportunities with us at theamericancollege.edu.
I would also say that economists have found that RMDs are pretty efficient if the goal is to generate income and to maximize happiness. So it's kind of interesting that if you legacy values with RMDs, by the time you hit your 80s and your 90s, the legacy values are very small. So really, it is efficient in the sense that it uses the money up for the purpose that you saved it. The purpose in a defined contribution plan or in an IRA, the purpose of that money is to spend it on retirement. Right. With a 10-year stretch, it's not really that efficient to pass it on. So the RMD kind of forces you to spend the money down in a way that you probably should be doing anyway. But it's got its own idiosyncrasies.
Well, and I actually see that. So in some new research, I can look at how households leverage things like lifetime income, capital income, wage income, and then non-qualified and qualified savings. And you do see a very different utilization rate of qualified monies versus non-qualified monies because of the RMDs.
Yeah.
And so I think that RMDs are an effective way to, one, ensure they take money from the account but also spend it.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm a little worried about pushing back RMDs to say 75 or further, because you're not encouraging individuals to actually use the money, right? I mean, the thing is, even with RMDs, if you can take it out and not spend it, but if you don't, require someone to access those savings, they might just actively choose not to do so. So we need like RMDs at like 65.
I'm with you 100%. When people say, RMDs are terrible, we should push them back farther, you're ignoring the fact that the rest of us taxpayers are subsidizing these IRAs. It is a tax expenditure that's $200 billion a year. I'm not upset by the fact that the government actually has a system that forces you to spend the money down, because that's why you save. That's why the government is subsidizing it in the first place. I don't have a policy problem with that at all. In fact, I'm with you. I think it probably should start at age 65. So
I don't know if it'll be testable at some point, but I'll be curious how these changes they've been making with the RMD rules are affecting. I mean, one, it is this two-stage thing. One, you take the withdrawal, then how much do you spend? But I just don't like this idea that that point is getting pushed back further and further and further, because it is, to your earlier question to me, going to encourage more and more money to be left to heirs, not to be enjoyed during someone's lifetime.
Right, and with a 10-year stretch, it's now the government is going to collect more of it. Essentially, they get their money a little bit more quickly. So, RMDs. Let's move beyond that to maybe some other alternatives. So one is a flexible strategy, but every year there is a limitation on the amount of money that you it's in other words, if you make it 5%, then you're spending $50,000 a year. The market does well, you can move up to $52,500. The market does poorly, you can move down to $57,500. But there's no guardrail. So essentially it's unconstrained, but annually constrained. What are some of the benefits of that?
Well, so I think that there is a pretty big flaw with guardrails, with RMDs, because they view the portfolio in isolation, right? So the portfolio is only one of many assets you use to fund retirement. So let's say you're retiring at age 60, okay? And you're gonna have Social Security at age 70. Well, how much you would withdraw from your portfolio earlier in retirement is very different than later retirement. So I like conceptually RMDs, but I think if you're gonna do a good job of figuring out how to adjust withdrawals over time, you need to think about all the assets in someone's wealth, not just the portfolio.
No, talk to me about that, because I think you make a very interesting point, which is you should probably have a spending strategy if your goal is to delay claiming Social Security that's going to allow you to spend significantly more from your savings between retirement age and 70.
Yeah.
And then it's going to pull less out of the investment portfolio because you're going to replace that essentially with a higher Social Security income. By the way, you and I are both on the same page when it comes to delaying claiming of Social Security. We generally recommend it if you're in decent health, or even if you have, say, a spouse who's in decent health and you're a higher earner, then it's pretty much a no-brainer to delay claiming Social Security. Why? Because the rules for the amount of income that you get extra for delayed claiming were created in the early 1980s. They were based on differences in mortality tables, differences in real earnings. Now you actually can increase your retirement wealth by delayed claiming. So generally it's a no-brainer. Something that we should incorporate into all distribution strategies is one that bridges the spending up to the point of age 70 and then allows Social Security to kick in. And then essentially what Social Security does is it takes pressure off the remainder of the portfolio.
Right, I think that obviously a lot of Americans don't have the means to delay claiming. And there's some folks out there who aren't healthy, but like if you have an advisor who are reasonably healthy, it is the best place to get guaranteed lifetime income. It is the place that everyone should start. And you know, in my research and others, you know, I'm just not convinced that enough advisors are actively thinking about it. I think a big reason why could be, you know, issues around the trust fund being depleted in 10 years. But again, and this is maybe just me in my opinion, but I just think it's unlikely that benefits are going to be affected at all for folks who are near retirement. So I'd love to see them address that issue, but that's not up to me. So
yeah, so I think, you know, you make a very good point that some people are not able to execute the strategy, but if you have enough money to have a financial advisor, it's probably something that, now how do you counteract that tendency of, you know, a good chunk of the population to say, I'm going to take my money right now, I don't trust the government, you know, Social Security is going bankrupt. What do you say to somebody like that?
Well, I mean, you know, I get emails from advisors all the time, right? I got one a few weeks ago and the guy's like, I walked him through everything and I explained things and nothing that I could say to him had an effect. I'm like, you know, what do you use as your longevity planning age? Oh, 90 plus. Well, then it's a no-brainer. Like, what are you going to earn on your portfolio? Oh, I mean, so all these things, but still he's like, nope, I just think that early claiming is the way to go. And I think that you know, if advisors, if I can't convince a lot of advisors, it's going to be even harder to convince people that don't do this for a living. So I don't know where it all comes from. It could be incentives, but that really, you know, and the thing is, if you're not going to delay claiming Social Security, you're probably not going to buy an annuity, right? Because like annuities aren't going to be as advantageous as delay claiming. So I really wish, you know, advisors out there who are listening, you should really, you know, include that in every single financial plan. You know, talk to your clients about, you know, delaying at least to 67, possibly to 70, because that is, I think it's one of the only things today that the vast majority of people that do this for a living, like professionally, like researchers, agree on.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single person I know who is an economist.
Probably one or two crazy. There's always the crazies out there, but like, you know, any normal person's going to say, yeah, it makes total sense.
But I think when people say, well, what about a 25% cut in Social Security? A, politically, that's probably never going to happen.
All people vote. There's no way. Like,
and second of all, it happens to everybody, including the ones who claimed early. So even if you incorporate that kind of a change, it's still better to delay.
Well, I think like the one thing that I've heard people like, they'll say, oh, I'm going to claim early, and then I'm going to get this higher benefit for life. I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like, what do you think? Because you claimed early, like you're going to lock in a higher benefit that someone, you know, claims 3 years later gets. Like, you know, I think that you can, again, like no one knows what's going to happen, but I think the key is having the conversations actively about the benefits of doing it.
All right, so a baseline of income from Social Security, that's our plan. Both of us are planning on buying some form of guaranteed income. Now, guaranteed income as a bond substitute has a lot of benefits. First of all, you get the mortality credits, which means that you can spend more every year. Now, this is, I think, maybe something that we need to walk through very quickly, which is why is it that you can spend more when you take, say, you know, $300,000 of $1 million portfolio, half of your bond allocation, and use it to buy a guaranteed lifetime income?
Well, so I think like allocating a lifetime income it's like a win-win, in that you're going to get more income from the monies that you quote unquote annuitize, and then you can spend more from the rest of your portfolio. So it actually creates two ways to have more income for life, because what happens is when you have more income that's protected or guaranteed for life is that it reduces that magnitude of failure. You know, if for some reason you have to make a change in your spending, it's not a big of a deal when you have this higher base level of income. So I mean, you can kind of radically increase someone's ability and willingness to spend if you have more of that allocated to lifetime income. And I'm a big proponent that like every American out there should have enough protected guaranteed lifetime income to cover their essential expenses, because it kind of changes your relationship with your money and how you view spending from your portfolio. So, so it's pretty, like would be the place to start, but again, annuities would be the next place to go to kind of fill the gap.
And what about retirement portfolios? When you're building a portfolio to fund income, and we've discussed before that this is kind of a liability-driven process. Yep. You think about your future spending as a liability. How would you give a simple explanation of how to design an optimal investment strategy to create retirement income?
How much time do we have?
Not enough.
So I think what's really important to note is that monies that you're going to be using in a portfolio to fund spending are often going to be used to fund more flexible expenses. So people often use methodologies from pensions like LDI when it comes to retirees. And so I like to think about like liability aware investing, because people are very different than pensions. People have lots of choice. And the monies that you're going to often see allocated in a portfolio to fund spending is usually more flexible. So I really don't think like putting all the money in government bonds makes a lot of sense, because you want to think about the trade-offs. Right. If you can buy bonds, but like usually the money you're going to be again investing for, you have that flexibility. So it needs to be a diversified portfolio. My session actually at the conference later today is thinking about how risk changes over longer investment time horizons, and how real assets like commodities, real estate, infrastructure, et cetera, become a lot more efficient when you look at inflation as a risk and look at longer investment time horizons. Where people, commodities have been somewhat inefficient historically, but if you kind of pull money from both equities and fixed income, a really diversified portfolio I think really is the way to go for most retirees versus just traditional stocks and bonds.
That's interesting. So instead of thinking about annual volatility of your investment portfolio, you're thinking more about volatility of income that you can generate from that portfolio. David, wonderful to have you join us again on the podcast. Great to see you again personally.
Great to see you.
That's all for now, but you can find all our episodes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most other streaming services. Be sure to like us, follow us, and leave us a rating and review. Shares is a production of the American College of Financial Services, and we hope you join us next time as we share ideas that expand your opportunities.